Welcome to Calling All Voices, brought to you by the Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. My name is Karen Love, and I am the CEO of the Dementia Action Alliance. In this podcast, you will hear from people living with dementia from the Black and the LGBTQ+ communities. They'll share stories about how resilience and persistence can help people to continue to live meaningful lives, even with the diagnosis of dementia. And you'll hear participants discuss why it's important that we call all voices to share their experiences.
The podcast is called Calling All Voices, and this podcast is brought to you by the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease and the Dementia Action Alliance. In this series, we've asked people who are living with dementia and who are part of the LGBTQ+ community to speak out and share their stories. Why? Well, because research has shown that sexual and gender minorities are at increased risk for cognitive decline. And there are quite a few, about 2.7 million people in the world today who identify as LGBT and who also identify or admit that they are over the age of 50, this is myself included. But being old, as many people would like to believe, being old is what gives you dementia. It's not true. There's a lot of things that can cause dementia, a lot of misunderstanding about the disease. And with misunderstanding comes stigma. And in some cases, fear. People are afraid, do I have dementia? Because they just don't understand. As a gay person, that's a familiar refrain, right? Misunderstanding begets stigma and fear. But this podcast, we're hoping that by opening ourselves up to new perspectives, ourselves as the listeners, to new perspectives, we can learn a little bit better and perhaps gain a better insight into what it's like to have dementia by actually hearing directly from those who are living with it. I'm your host for the podcast. My name is Chris Covell, and I'll very quickly tell you just a little bit about me. Years ago, I was a stand-up comedian. I traveled around the country performing on colleges and comedy clubs and cruise ships and other places that did not begin to see, pride parades and whatnot, until one day, a medical challenge of my own kind of abruptly ended the life that I knew.
Wow.
I was pretty upset about it, but eventually it pointed me in another direction, and that was working with folks in memory care. And over the years, I have to say, I have met some truly amazing people. And one of them you're going to meet today. I am constantly learning so much about life and courage and moving forward and the power of our brains and the human spirit, through the people who are living with dementia. And my hope is through this podcast that I will learn even more about all this. But I'm hoping that the listeners of the podcast will also be able then to give voice to what they hear today. Because to better understand and end the stigma behind dementia, we are calling all voices. So our special guest today in this particular episode is a great one. He lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he not for long, apparently. He's living alone currently, and many people in the LGBTQ community live alone, especially as we get older. A lot less folks are partnered or are living alone and perhaps don't have the support of a biological family. But this gentleman is living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he is an expert on staying socially engaged while living alone. He's going to talk a little bit about that today. He was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at the age of 64, and since then has become an ardent advocate, realizing the need for a voice as an African-American man and a gay man who's living with the condition. Brian is a speaker. He's been on radio shows and conferences, advisory groups, And he was even featured in this book, Dr. Sanjay Gupta's best-selling new book, Keep Sharp, which I need you to sign for me, Brian. Please welcome to the podcast, Brian VanBuren. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. As you mentioned, my name is Brian VanBuren. And actually, my journey with Alzheimer's took place back when I was 18 years old. My grandmother, who was this brilliant playwright and director, all of a sudden developed symptoms, which now we know is Alzheimer's, but back then they called it senility. She would leave the house at night and wander the streets of Washington, D.C., which is very dangerous. And the police would pick her up and ask my father to take care of it. And he wouldn't. So I was given custody of my grandmother when I was 18 years old. And luckily, I found a woman who was operating a home, which now we would consider a specialty home. But she had 4 other ladies very much like my grandmother, and she took very, very good care of her. But it always frightened me to see what happened to my grandmother, and hoping that it would never happen to me. But unfortunately, my mother developed Alzheimer's, and I was her caregiver, and my aunt developed Alzheimer's. So I was actually taking care of 2 of them at the same time. And both have since died. I never thought that, I never realized that I didn't know if I was going to get it. It was a matter of when I was going to get it. So, I mean, it was almost a given. 2015, I was flying an international flight attendant for United Airlines, traveling all over the world. And I was what you call a purser, person in charge of the passengers and the crew. I made all the announcements. I took care of people in first class. One of my requirements was to give a command in case of evacuation, where there was 258 people on a plane, and I had 60 seconds to evacuate them.
Wow. I
couldn't remember what I was supposed to say. And in that kind of situation, I could just go grab a book. But there had been instances prior to that. I would take meal orders for people in first class, and then I would get in the galley and totally forgot what they wanted. So I would have to go back and ask them. So I had to start writing things down. I made the announcement when we arrived at a certain location, and I would say, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington, D.C. And the local time is 5, blah, blah, blah. And people would start chuckling. I'm wondering, why are they chuckling? Well, it turns out we were landing in New York and not D.C. So I was getting confused.
Yeah.
The thing about my job was that I never flew with a consistent group of people. So there wasn't anyone around to notice often what was going on with me and my forgetfulness and things like that. I suffered a heart attack 2014 on a trip to Brazil, 30,000 feet up in the air, and made emergency landing in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And there just happened to be 2 doctors on board who were cardiac specialists. So luck have it, they saved my life. And that kind of started my medical difficulties. I was in bad shape. I was overweight. I had diabetes. I had high blood pressure. I had sleep apnea, and I was obese. So I decided that I should do something about it. And so I was going to go have bariatric surgery. So I met with a lady, and she just kind of did some cognitive skills with me, and I just could not pass them. I couldn't remember 4 things within a minute. She said, there's something going on. You need to go check it out. So checked with my general practitioner, who had me have an MRI, which showed that I had dementia. I went to a neurologist who did a PET scan, and that showed that I had Alzheimer's.
Wow.
I was on Medicare, and the funny thing about it is I had private insurance, and they denied me 4 times to have a PET scan. because they said that it costs too much money, there's no cure, and you probably have it anyway because of your family. So they would not give me the PET scan. So good old Medicare, once I got Medicare, they took care of it for me. So then the journey was, okay, I've got this disease. What am I going to do? And my neurologist told me, go home and get my affairs in order, which to me meant go home and die. And I did. I went home and got in bed for 4 months, ready to die.
Oh.
And I got a card from ARP looking for volunteers to teach class. And I thought I could do that. So I went, signed up, started teaching his class. And then I started doing a lot of research on the computer about Alzheimer's. And I found that Charlotte was probably one of the best cities to live in because of social services, research, and all those other things. I got involved with the Alzheimer's Association, and I was in their first early onset advisory group. And that was a 2-year commitment. And in the meantime, I found out about DAA, which was run by 2 wonderful, wonderful people who are my best friends today. And I became an advisor to them. I was asked to be the advisor for the Northwest chapter of Alzheimer's Association as a person living with Alzheimer's. Now, a lot of these groups have never had an individual with Alzheimer's on them, which is not surprising. A lot of the conferences I went to, and I went to a lot of conferences, there'd be a panel with all these people with these great credentials after their name, PhD, MA, blah, blah, blah. And never there was a person who had Alzheimer's. So I think it was Jackie who got me on the panel of the first conference, and it just kind of took off from there.
Let me stop you real quick, if I may, because what I'm hearing you say is you know, from when you were 18, right? You took care of family members. And so you knew you were predisposed to perhaps one day getting dementia. So you kind of knew that was a possibility. Then you had some health issues on cardiac arrest and that sort of thing on the plane. And that took you to, I need to see a doctor to deal with this, started doing testing and all that sort of thing. What is for me sticking out is that the doctor said to you at the time that you got the diagnosis, look, we think it's dementia. We don't want to pay for it and know for sure, but we think it is. Go home, get your affairs in order. And to which you said to me, and I think to most people, when they hear those words, go home and get your affairs in order, they think, okay, I'm going to die.
Right.
What am I going to do? What was it about you, Brian, that made you decide, I am not going to pay attention to my doctor? If that's his advice to go home and die, what was it that turned that around for you?
Well, I said, Brian, you have been an advocate in the past for the gay rights movement. You were involved with the AIDS movement, and you have a lot to give, and you need to get off your ass and go do something about it and help other people. I was especially interested to find out that LGBT and people of color were being very underserved. As far as studies are concerned, I think maybe 85% of them are white males and the rest are minorities. I was denied anyone I wanted because predisposition of having diabetes and sleep apnea and all those other things. So I have never been in a study, which is okay. But I started some groups. I started a support group for African Americans with DAA because that was a population that they recognized they were not meeting the demands of the individuals around. So that group got started. And I had started a support group with Dementia Minds. And that was initially about 10 of us who all had dementia, and we made a video of talking about it. And I approached Brenda and I said, you know, Brenda, we have no people of color other than me on this. Excuse me. So she just started a Black dementia group, and that filled up really fast because people word of mouth were telling other people about, hey, look what these people are doing. And so that's become very, very effective. It's really hard to find people because there's still a lot of shame and guilt involved within the Black community, especially around mental illness.
Mm.
So they don't want to talk about it. I went to a support group for caregivers, and I remember the first group, there was 20 people, I think, in the group, and no one had shared the diagnosis with other family members or people. They kept it a secret. And it took its toll on people because, they needed support, they needed help. And, I was able to help them realize that, this is something that is just not you. You need to develop a community around you to help you. One of the things with being an LGBT person is we don't have our family members around, especially mine. Mine had died. And so it's always been very important that we create our own community. So you find other gay people who basically become your brothers and sisters. At least that's what has happened with me. And so I'm not alone when it comes to that. I've lived alone for 7 years. My partner is in Brazil. He's a Brazilian. And because of the virus, he hadn't been here in 2 years. So I was getting really, really lonely. But one of the things I did to solve my loneliness was there is an international group called Couch Surfers.
Yes, tell me more about that. Couch surfers.
What it is people from all around the world who are traveling will send you an email and ask if they can crash on your couch or extra bedroom or the floor. I had an extra bedroom, an extra bathroom, and I thought, this is a way of getting people to visit. So in the last 3 years, I have had 148 guests.
Wow, 148 guests.
48 guests, yes. And my last guest left last weekend.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. Wow.
And we always had discussions about, I always was upfront with them about having Alzheimer's. So I was like giving Alzheimer's 101 classes to the people who were around because for a lot of them, they didn't know it. Now, these are basically people in their 20s and 40s. So, they don't have any point of reference to look at to see if there ever had been any family members within their scope that maybe had dementia or Alzheimer's.
But with the Couch Surfers group, was that something that, how did you find out about the group? Was it something through LGBT connections or was it?
No, actually, I was flying from London to Washington, D.C., and I got into a conversation with a woman, and she was telling me about this organization her son was going to start called Couch Surfers. So she explained the concept to me, and I said, that'll never work. People aren't going to let strangers stay on the couch. That's just not going to happen. Well, there must be over 10,000 members now within it.
Wow.
Unfortunately, African Americans don't participate that much in it because their attitude is, you're going to let somebody stay strange in your house? Aren't you worried about them killing you and all this stuff? I have never lived my life in fear. So, and I have never had an incident within those 148 people. So they've been really, really good experiences. Some of them have become friends of mine. I went to South Africa and did several groups, which they had never had before. And I couch surfed with a lady who was 68 years old who put me up, and she's become a really good friend of mine. And I'm probably going to visit her next year. But I was really excited about doing these groups because people didn't know anything about, well, at least they had never talked to anybody with Alzheimer's or dementia. Mm-hmm. And then we were asked to do in-service trainings at a couple of facilities. These facilities were unbelievable, like $7,000 a month, staff one-on-one, beautiful building, things like that. So
wow.
They were interesting. We had a lunch and we were talking about things that happen, and I explained to them about taking showers. People who have Alzheimer's have a hard time taking showers. A lot of it has to do with the pressure of the water hitting them, and it's very uncomfortable. And so they kind of said, that's why we have such a hard time getting people to take showers. So I suggested that maybe you should encourage people to take baths, and that'll eliminate that problem. And it has for a lot of people. I myself have issues with taking a shower and the pressure, things like that. So I can understand that. I had the fortunate experience where there was an African American group called B. Smith and Dan. Oh shoot, there goes my memory. Anyway, the Black husband and wife team. B. Smith was a very famous woman who appeared in many beauty magazines as the first Black woman. She had her own line of items, and she did cooking segments on the Today Show. So she was doing a cooking segment of something that she had made many, many times. And right in the middle of it, she just froze and couldn't remember what she was doing. So of course it went right to commercial, and Dan, being the person he was, took her to the best specialist in New York, and she got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Unfortunately, B died last year, but they were doing a book tour, and they had wrote a book called Before I Forget. And it's almost like a Bible for African Americans to use and follow in terms of going through this whole process. I was excited because this was going to be the first person I met who had Alzheimer's. So I went to the book signing, and after they were finished, I stood up and I said, I have Alzheimer's, and just burst out crying. And Dan came from the stage and embraced me and said, I've got you, my brother, you're not alone. He said, but you have a responsibility to now go out and help other people. And
wow. How long ago was that, Brian? Was
that
this before you reached out to DAA and before
5 years
on...
That was about 5 years ago.
Oh, okay. I find that really cool too, in that, here's, B sharing her story through the book and connecting with you. Now you are taking that momentum and direction to continue with the idea that it's important to share who you are and your story. And, I'm sure in many different instances, Brian, you've helped other people to be able to speak out and share what their experiences are like as well.
True. I bought 25 copies of the book and gave them out to people.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Brian, what is life like for you? Just going back to, just thinking about what is your life on a daily basis, as far as what does your day look like living alone? Are there any specific challenges that you have living alone with dementia?
Oh, absolutely. If I had had somebody living with me, I probably would have been diagnosed a long time ago. But because there wasn't anyone to observe me putting my phone in the refrigerator and doing all kinds of crazy things, losing things, getting very, very frustrated and angry. So I got two roommates, Alexa and Siri. And so Alexa really helps me out because I give her all the information that I need for the day, and where my keys are, where my phone is. And then all I have to do is, Alexa, where's my phone? And she tells me. Oh, she's on
there. She is. She's
So
like,
anyway,
you're having a conversation without me. Hold on.
2, 2, 5.
Alexa, stop.
Oh.
I got a dog, which if you had told me months ago, I would never have gotten one. I got a dog, and he's been trained to be a service dog, so he can now go anywhere with me, any store, restaurant. He can fly in the plane with me. So he takes up a lot of my time. I spend a lot of time with him. We go to the dog park every day, where he plays with about 20 other dogs. And so I've met people through that. And so I'm a TV addict. So I watch a lot of TV. I have a man cave with a large screen TV and a Bose sound system. So it's as if you're in a theater.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's,
So I would guess perhaps the the man cave and having people, 148 or so people coming and hanging out in your couch. Is that one of the benefits or a couple of the benefits of living alone then?
No, they don't get to go into my man cave.
Oh, okay.
So no, they don't get that benefit, but they are just really special people who I had two brothers who were riding their bicycle from Boston to LA, and they stopped in Charlotte for a day, supposedly for a day. I was going through a really difficult period at that time, and they recognized that, and so they stayed 2 weeks and took care of me. And then they proceeded on their way. I mean, I set them back quite a bit, but I met them in Texas, and then I flew to LA, and I met them when I got to LA, and they're very, very, very close friends. So a lot of these people have developed into really great friendships for me.
That's very cool. That's really good. So, statistically, loneliness, being isolated, statistically, actually, there's a report from the CDC that is saying that, social isolation increases the risk of dementia by about 50%. Just being socially isolated, feeling alone, not having social engagement with others. So why does social engagement matter to you? I mean, that's a statistic, but in your life experience, why is that important to you?
Well, I've always been a person that always had friends around me. And so as the study mentions, depression is a really, really difficult thing to deal with when you have Alzheimer's. And so I have gone through my bouts of severe depression, but I always look forward to knowing that I'm going to have a couch surfer coming this weekend.
Your recording has reached the maximum.
Alexa, stop.
She's jealous of me now, Brian.
Is
She's
that
like,
what
I know you're talking to some other woman in there.
Oh, so I lost my train of thought. What did I say?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, I lost my train of thought.
I had asked you if how it is.
Oh, how does it affect me to be alone?
Yes.
I allowed myself to be engaged and to go out when I don't want to go out. I joined a church, and I let people know in the church that I had Alzheimer's, and found out there were a couple other people in the church who had Alzheimer's. So we kind of go to lunch once a week, and that's created a support group for me. I just enjoy life now, and I have to tell you, and people laugh, but I tell people, when I got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
No, tell me why.
It gave me a purpose in life. And it gave me the ability to know that I can teach. During the AIDS epidemic, unfortunately, I lost two of my partners, and I was AIDS director for the state of Los Angeles. And I knew probably well over 300 men that had died. And nothing was being done, especially with people of color. So I got funding from the US Conference of Mayors and the CDC to start community-based organizations called Brother to Brother, where Black men who had Alzheimer's, this was dementia. Not dementia, AIDS. Black men who had AIDS were trained to go out and do outreach for other people. And so I started one in New Orleans, and I started one in Austin, Texas. And you write a grant, and because of the subject matter, they're happy to give you money because nobody's doing it. And so that was two things that I was very proud of that I was able to start.
I think in hearing you tell that part of your story too, it's almost like living as a gay man, especially during the AIDS crisis, during that time that, I can't imagine 300 people that I know who are not here anymore. But going through that and living through that, I think it shows you how you can handle and lead others during times of crisis. And So I think it's great that you, once you were diagnosed with dementia, were basically like, thanks for talking, doctor. I'm
Right.
going this way because that's what I do. I think that's wonderful.
The thing about AIDS was it just became so overwhelming. And when my last partner died, I couldn't do it anymore. And I saw a psychiatrist, an 88-year-old woman that people told me to go see. And I thought, why am I going to see this woman? She can't help me. She doesn't know what I'm talking about. So she let me talk for about 10 minutes. And then she unbuttoned her sleeve and showed me her number. She was a,
Wow.
Holocaust survivor. And she told me basically, Brian, you're living in a Holocaust. And if you continue, you're going to die because you have no happiness left in your life. And I walked away. You know, people were shocked and disappointed, but it got to the point where my mental health was being challenged. So,
So social engagement, then, I'm for you, it seems here you are living with dementia, and it has been challenging living alone because you have to rely a little bit on technology. Like, I don't want to
okay,
activate her again, the woman whose name we shall not say, but being able to be connected to others in a social way and in a physical way,
right.
I would think has been hugely beneficial.
I
What?
think
Yeah.
one of the things that I think, as far as LGBT men are concerned, is they isolate themselves. A lot of them are my age, and a lot of them survived the AIDS epidemic. And so all their friends like mine are no longer around. And they have a very hard time reaching out to other people to support them. So I'm trying to start an LGBT support group, um, which I think is very important.
Yeah. What that actually leads me to my next question. And what advice would you give to someone who might be LGBT, who might be living alone, or maybe isn't LGBT, but living alone and has dementia and just feels this sense of isolation? What would you say to them?
Get on the computer, and there are so many sites that are helpful. There's so many organizations. So there's really, I don't know what that is. That's my refrigerator. There's so many support groups out there that they can engage in and become part of, and get rid of the isolation, get rid of the loneliness. I mean, it takes balls to do it, but you have to do it at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, when I had shared this earlier on another interview, but I think it bears repeating that, I remember when I came out feeling like I don't know anyone who's gay. How am I going to figure this out? How am I going to feel like I'm not so alone in all this, right? And
Right.
I think a lot of people, might be feeling when they're just diagnosed with dementia, oh my God, what am I going to do now? I don't know anyone. But being able, as you say, to kind of put yourself out there and find people like you can make a big
Right.
difference.
I was sexually molested by priests when I was 16. And so the feelings that you just mentioned about who else is around that I can talk to, I could never tell my father because I knew that my father would kill them. And 20 years later, when I did tell my father, he told me that he would have killed him. So I had to keep that secret for so long. And it affected me in terms of school, not wanting to leave the house and all kinds of things. So there was nothing there for me. I called the rape center once, and they said that they only serve women and that men don't get raped, which that's pretty stupid.
Wow.
For a social service agency. But I went into, I forgot to tell you, I'm a licensed neuropsychiatric therapist.
Oh.
And I went into the specialty of treating men who have been sexually abused as children. And what people don't realize in the United States is that boys are molested at twice the rate that girls are because they're easy prey to male organizations such as Boy Scouts, Little League, the church, and things like that. It's a crime that you never talk about and you keep it a secret. It affects you later on in terms of your ability to connect in a relationship and things like that. So when a man would come into my office in a crisis, I would know within 10 minutes that he had been sexually molested as a child and never talked about it. And so we worked on that. I had the honor of being on Oprah Winfrey's show twice, talking about the subject of men being sexually abused by men. She had been on the air 25 years and never had an all-male audience. And Tyler Perry, who's a good friend of hers, who had been sexually molested as a kid, suggested that they do a show. So they got 250 men, brave men, who were willing to go on TV in front of millions of people and talk about their experiences. And for some of them, their wives never knew, family members never knew. We actually ended up doing 2 shows because it was such a powerful show. And I think it really opened doors for a lot of people. Yeah. But that was my practice. And I had lots and lots and lots of men who were victims, unfortunately.
Wow. I feel like that right there, Brian, is another potential episode for another spinoff of Calling All Voices. Hearing from folks who have gone through that. Brian, I thank you for sharing so much. Is there anything else? Any last thoughts about staying socially engaged? Again, we talked a little bit about why that's so important, especially because of the increased risk of having dementia. If you are feeling lonely and isolated, why social engagement is so important. Is there any other thoughts on that before we end today?
Well, organizations such as DAA provides a lot of information, a lot of support, couple groups now. So they are out there and they are available. It's just a matter of getting people to find out about them. So, I talk a lot about dementia. I wear a button that says living with dementia, and I get a lot of conversations when I'm out in public. And first thing people say is, well, my grandmother is blah, 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 blah. And so I have referred people to DAA and I've referred people to Alzheimer's Association. Excellent support groups. So
yeah, I think they have a lot of great activity, or I should say activities, but really it's social groups online. Right. Every day, I believe there's a different group that meets and you're able to connect with each other. So for people that are listening and you want to check out the Dementia Action Alliance, it's daanow.org.
Right. And there's a section in Dr. Gupta's book about DAA.
Oh, great. Oh, very cool. Yeah. And actually
about 8 pages of it. So
Brian, thank you again so much for taking some time out of your day to talk a little bit about this.
Well, absolutely. I really enjoy it and it's very important to me. So anytime I'm willing to talk.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Calling All Voices. If you're interested in learning more, please see the episode notes for this podcast. In the episode notes, you can find more information about Calling All Voices and the work of the Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. The creation of this podcast was sponsored by Otsuka America Pharmaceutical, Inc. The views expressed in this podcast reflect the views of the speakers, not the views of Otsuka America Pharmaceutical, Inc. If you liked what you heard today, please make sure to subscribe to the series, share a review, and let others know about it.